Grandmaster Wesley So takes his chair up against Magnus Carlsen. Wesley is early to the game and Magnus Carlsen is not yet on the board. But where is Magnus? Right outside the players' lounge, Magnus is getting ready for the battle. He goes inside, and this is the space where he's generally sitting. He gets his stuff and is ready to get to the game. Now Wesley So has been quite a tough opponent for Magnus in general. They have had great clashes before. They have traded wins and losses against each other, and now Magnus is going to the game. He has had 2 consecutive wins here against SL Narayanan in the previous round and Vidit Gujarati on the previous day. So Magnus is in good shape, but Wesley has just destroyed Arjun Erigaisi in the previous round. So this is promising matchup here that is going to happen. And there you see handshake. Magnus arrives late. Wesley did not start the clock. That is a great gesture from Wesley So. He waited for Magnus to arrive before starting the clock, and while all other games had begun, Magnus adjusts all his pieces. And we are ready to go. He opens the game with 1 e4 and presses the clock. Now what's Wesley's response going to be? He's a very solid player. He responds back with e5. And knight comes out to f3. And Wesley thinks for a bit and plays the Petroff against Magnus. He doesn't play that often, but he did play it against Hans Niemann at the US Championships. And look at Magnus there, taking his time, adjusting his coat on the chair. This is basically trying to get some time for himself to think what is the variation he's going to play. He takes. Now the main move has been d6, but now the line that has become very trendy is this one. Earlier it used to be that black is just blundering, but now it has become popular because the modern engines are giving some good chances for black here. This is the same line that Wesley played against Hans Niemann. Takes at the US Championship, and I'm sure Magnus followed that game as well. Take, knight takes. You can see a very symmetrical position. By the way, for all those who are thinking why not to save the pawn here, it leads to g5, bishop g3, f5, very sharp play. So that's the reason why Magnus goes for simple chess, takes, attacks the knight, f6, and now long castles, bishop d7. Wesley is very well prepared. This is also what he played against Hans, and now knight b5. Magnus is going in, and Wesley castles. He's still in his prep, giving up a pawn. Magnus happily takes it. Look at the time on Wesley's clock, 26 minutes 34 seconds, and he's still blitzing it out. Bishop c5. This is actually a bit scary, you know, when you're facing a player like this. And Magnus is now down to 22 minutes, so he's clearly thinking over the board. g5, still blitzing. Now you can come back with your bishop g3, but Magnus decides to clarify the situation by taking the knight on e5. Bishop takes e5, fe, and now the knight comes back to c3. So Magnus is a pawn up, has this very stable e4 square for himself, but I love how Wesley's playing this. He attacks g4, and after takes, now he can take here, but then after rook d8, bishop d3 leads to a better position for white. So he goes check, king b1, and now bishop c6, takes, and bishop d3. So he's going after not the g4 pawn, but the g2 pawn, and he takes it. So black is still a pawn down, but now this bishop is hanging. By the way, h7 is hanging, Bishop f4, good move. So that if you take here, there is rook h8, and then I take this with the bishop or the rook, and it's fine. So Magnus goes h4, now threatening this pawn. You have to save it. So h6 played. Black is still close to equality, but has to be careful. Rook g1. Now very important move is bishop c6. Why is this important? Because when g5 is played, you can take and play bishop e3, attacking the rook. But now Wesley plays bishop f3, a big mistake. Why? Because now after g5, take, if you were to play bishop e3, then I go here, and you don't have any opportunity to attack the rook again, as these two pieces are attacked. So very, very unfortunate decision by Wesley, and g5 is found by Magnus. Take, and Wesley thought for many minutes before he played that move. e4, giving up another pawn. And Magnus takes it. Bishop takes e4. Now the point here is that if you play bishop g5, I can take on f3, and it's winning. So he goes bishop e4, knight takes. There's no way to take on g5 for the back rank weakness, because the knight protects it. And bishop e3, rook f1, he goes rook e8, attacking the knight. But Magnus has it all covered. He has prepared for this move. He pushes his pawn, so that if rook takes knight, there's g7 coming in. Bishop goes back to h6. And now knight c5. I love how Magnus really understands where the pieces belong. Now rook g8. Sometimes it's difficult for players to win such positions, but not for Magnus. First, he goes rook g1. The king is coming in. And now rook g4. Just improving the position of the king, of the rook. b6. And the knight comes back to the center on e4. Bishop g7. And he goes c3. Now Magnus would think in his mind, where does this knight belong really well? And he'll try to maneuver it that way. Yes, knight to g3. He's going to the f5 or the h5 square here. Rook h8. And there you have it. Knight jumps to f5. Bishop comes up to f6. And he pushes the pawn even one step ahead. Rook g8. Now this pawn is a bit weak. If the king comes up here, it would be some trouble. But Magnus stops it with rook e4. And you can't win this pawn because of rook g4 or rook e7. And white is winning. So in effect, this position is completely lost. And Wesley resigns here. Magnus Carlsen scores yet another victory. A very, very clinical one. But you can see that this line is actually pretty okay for white. For black, he can hold his own. If Wesley had played bishop c6 well, he was well prepared, he was blitzing out his moves, but Magnus managed to outwit him, and there you see, he's telling him to go back to c6. Maybe it would have worked out.
Totally different.
I think the game against Wesley pretty much hinged on one move. If he had retreated his bishop to c6, like I'm still a bit better. I think it's unpleasant for him, but I think it's much closer to a draw then. Whereas bishop f3, I mean, he thought for what felt like 12 minutes there, but the move he made just loses on the spot. Maybe he thought everything was